You're listening to the Fan2Fan podcast, episode 1. Yay! I'm actually doing Kermit hands. All right, let's start. Welcome to the Fan2Fan podcast, and I am your host, Bernie Gonzalez. And I know what you're thinking. Yet another podcast. Completely understand. So why should you listen to Fan2Fan? Why should you listen to me? I am a fan of movies, TV, cartoons, comics, video games, toys, collectibles, and probably like you, a lot of these things are really exciting to me. They're really interesting. So I wanted to talk to fans about what they are excited about and try to explore some really popular topics and maybe even some lesser known corners of our fan-filled world and try to explore a little bit about our fan subculture. I'm an artist, I'm a writer, and a designer, so I also want to explore the creative process and talk to folks that make the things that we love so much, whether they are filmmakers, illustrators, animators. I want to talk to them and find out what they're fans of, what inspires them to make the things that we love. This being the first episode of the show, I wanted to start with a conversation with someone with a few more podcasting years of experience under their belt. And that person is a good friend of mine, Josh Adams. Josh is on the I Hate Critics podcast. They review films. They've been doing it for a number of years, so I couldn't pass up an opportunity to talk to Josh about podcasting in general and maybe learn a few lessons along the way. Here we go.
You know, I wanted to do a podcast quite a long time ago, and it's funny that you're the one that I'm speaking to. Back in 2008, when I first got an iPod Classic, I started understanding what podcasts were and downloaded a few, genre-based ones, but also started to get into tech ones and, more news items and whatnot. And I thought to myself, boy, wouldn't it be fun to do one of these on my own? And I thought, well, who in my life would I be interested in talking to on a show? And technology like Skype, maybe it existed in 2008, but something along those lines came into my head. And
Sure.
I thought, well, my buddies Bernie and Brandon would be two great guys to have a show with. And so it's a little serendipitous that you wanted to do this because, of course, you're the first person I thought of. But back then, it was very much a low key thing, and I felt like podcasts were something that I might have been part of from the ground up. Not that I was actually producing anything or starring in anything or anything like that, but I felt like I was listening right at the groundswell of these things, and I felt very much so like part of something special. Now, of course, they're all over the place, and the listenership has gone up exponentially, and the equipment that you can use has become a little more affordable.
Absolutely.
Not to mention all of the access used to be through Apple, through iPods, through your iPhone. Now it's much more of an internet-based thing, and how you can make it tailored around easier on people to access it.
So how long have you been podcasting?
A little over 3 years now, and I started off as a special guest on the I Hate Critics show, and that was because there was a special Star Wars based episode in 2013. It was the 30th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, and Bob knew that, of course, I was a freak about it, and so he thought, well, let's bring a freak on the show and see how that works. And they must have thought, yeah, right. They must have thought it was okay because once Man of Steel came around, about a month later, they wanted me back on the show. And about that time, I was starting to think about writing a blog again, and that worked kind of hand in hand. I came back in August for, I think it was the Wolverine and they both said, hey, you know what? If you'd like to keep coming, then that would be great. And I haven't left them alone since. I'm like Todd Luiso in High Fidelity. I just started showing up. Now they can't get rid of me. So it worked out perfectly that way. And never for a moment did I think that I could possibly be on a podcast. But that, to be honest, Bernie, that shows you the transparency of podcasts. Anybody can be on it. I am proof. I have no credentials. Bob interviews musicians, and he has a way about him, a professionalism about that, being able to understand what this kind of show should be like. Sean is a professional film critic. He does this on the radio all the time. He's been a radio DJ for 20 years. So he has a cadence to what he says. He has a professionalism behind him. I'm a dude. So, and I've been on it for 3 years. So that tells you that literally anyone can do it.
Anyone with, so the two P's, I guess, professionalism, that would be one, but that almost goes second to the passion. Because you have to have a passion about something, whether it's, like you said, being a professional critic, whether it's a love for music, the musician scene, the craft of creating music or producing it or performing it. But the passion has to be there for anything. Podcasts, you have them about anything. You guys review movies. Mm-hmm. We've seen just about everything under the sun. Serial being one of the big ones that kind of brought podcasts to the forefront, the NPR Serial show.
Yes.
The Mark Maron show, to show that anyone can have a podcast. I mean, he, if I remember right, had a bout with alcoholism and for some time was a bit off the radar. And I think the podcast was kind of his second coming, and it just allowed him. It was an interesting thing that I read where it was talking about how if Garrison Keillor helped craft or create what we know as the American monologue, maybe the podcast is the American dialogue.
I would agree with that. And that is coupled with this idea that passion is very specific, because just like anything, mass media is more of a homogenized thing. Podcasts can be less homogenized and more specific to your passions. I know film review or movie discussion in general is a pretty popular thing, right? And we're passionate about that. But shoot, if we wanted to have a specific podcast about Italian films, there would be an audience for that, I'm sure. That's where podcasting is such a brilliant thing. It requires very little startup to do. You can reach an audience that is just as passionate about it as you are, and it's free. So, I mean, most of them, I would imagine at least, are free. So it's such a democratic process. I hope that makes sense to you.
Oh, it does. I mean, in the idea that that article that I'd sent you, Adam Ragusa, so he wrote 3 Ways Podcasts and radio actually aren't quite the same, but
yes,
the third one being that podcasts as accessed by most consumers are something that they opt into, which is an interesting idea. The idea that in 2016, 11% of Americans age 12 or more were listening to a podcast. And now in just last year in 2015, that had tripled. But it's very democratic in the sense that I choose to subscribe. I choose to make the commitment to download those shows, to subscribe to the feed or what have you, to use any of the different programs that are out there, Stitcher, iTunes, what have you. But I'm choosing to listen to those things, which is very different. It's a very active approach compared to radio, which can be passive.
Yes. Yeah. You're not being forced to or putting up with, the same kinds of 5-year-old advertisements in between segments or something like that. And the format is appealing as well, because usually there's a defined time for the same show. Our show runs about an hour, for example, each week. And I think people can come to expect that kind of thing. Whereas if it's serial, you know that you're going to be listening to an extensive episode, but it's a fixed length. with radio, you can get passive because it's going to be on whether you have the radio on or not. You have to choose a podcast. You have to push play. You have to continue listening to it. You're making a choice there. It's a great part of this whole thing, and that you're making the choice. It's so you to be invested in a podcast means you already have to kind of like the subject material. That's why you chose it in the first place.
One of the quotes from the notes being that people under the age of 30 do not own radios, which is, I think, fairly true even for people over 30, because I know for a fact I don't own a radio, or in the fact that I do, but it hasn't been plugged in for probably about 3 years.
Yeah, yes, there's that. And if it wasn't for the car, I wouldn't seek it out. If it wasn't for something I was already loyal to 10 years ago, I also wouldn't seek it out.
And I guess this is the same idea as DVR. People are still watching the TV shows. They're just watching it in a different way.
Yes, I'm glad that you said that, because I was going to mention that I thought that podcasts and the way that people choose to do that was birthed of the DVR, that TiVo spawned the idea of a podcast and democratization of how we consume our entertainment. They're both linked, that's for sure. I know that there's one radio show I listen to out of Chicago, and I'm not going to be in my car listening to the radio from 1 until 6 p.m. And the ads, if I did from 1 to 6 p.m., it would drive me crazy every day. The ads are the same the entire time, and they perpetuate themselves, on end. And the way that radio is, you can go a 20-minute block, but then you're going to hear maybe 5 to 10 minutes of advertisements, and you kind of, they lose you a little bit. They've condensed that particular radio show into something that's an hour by hour thing. And I choose to consume it that way. And it's not for a lack of loyalty. I'm downloading every show. It's more of how I want to consume it, and how I don't want to consume the massive amounts of advertisements that go with radio. That's not to say, of course, that podcasts haven't taken it upon themselves to add advertising. The one that I was speaking of, this Chicago show, they have added advertisements in the past month and a half, and it's started as a first of every hour advertisement. Then it went to twice an hour. Now it's every segment they have one ad. It happens to be the same one every time. I can start to see a trend here, having listened to this kind of stuff for 8-9 years now. That's where it's going. The same kind of stuff is going to creep into there because people are able to monetize this.
I think the idea with the podcast, especially, and this is where I've noticed where I especially enjoy a podcast, is in the intimacy that you have with the host. I listen to the Nerdist podcast regularly. I enjoy Chris Hardwick. There are episodes where he will talk to filmmakers, creators. There was a J.J. Abrams episode, Robert Rodriguez episode, immediately piqued my interest. There was a recent episode where he had Iggy Pop. I'm not a fan of Iggy Pop. Can't necessarily say I'm a fan of his music. Still downloaded the episode, still listened to it, enjoyed it. But there was a sense of loyalty there. And it's interesting that you said the ads, because the idea of the DVR model, where advertisers are inserting their ads in there, doesn't change the fact that people are watching the shows or willing to deal with a 30-second commercial, but they refuse to deal with a 3-minute commercial now. They're making the choice of saying, I will delay watch this show and do something else so I can fast forward. So many friends that I know who will watch Walking Dead, they will start watching at 8:15 to give them a 15-minute buffer time to brush through the commercials.
That's a wise move, man. That really is.
You get some lunch ready for the next day. Next thing you know, you can brush through 2 waves of commercials. But I mean, that's the on-demand model. Netflix, when House of Cards first came out and it was appointment television, people were taking off the Friday to try to burn through all 13 episodes. And since then, it's become the standard, to the point when I believe the last season came out, Kevin Spacey, through his character, gave a presidential pardon that they were releasing on Twitter, that you could show to your manager and say, you know what, I've been pardoned by President Underwood, so that I don't have to show to work on Friday because I'm watching all the episodes of House of Cards today. So sorry about that.
Well, I wish that would have been the same case with Daredevil, because that's certainly what I did when that came out last month. I skipped a Friday to watch the whole thing.
How long did it take you to watch all 13 episodes?
Less than 24 hours. I couldn't burn right through them because I mean, that particular show, yeah, I couldn't quite do it. But boy, if it would have been just a lick better, then I definitely would have.
There is a market for a new age of merit badges. I feel that's very that's not being served here. There's somewhere there's an award for watching 13 episodes of whatever in like a 24-hour time span.
Yeah, my merit badge is an insomnia. That's pretty much how I worked it.
So the Fan Film Perspective. So that was a blog that you'd started back in 2013-ish?
That's right. Yeah.
And how long did that run?
It ran through about August of last year. And what I realized, and the reason I stopped it, is because it was really doubling down with this show. Everything that I needed to get out through the blog, which is why I started it in the first place, I was doing that on air as well. So it was becoming repetitive. And occasionally when I get passionate enough, I start writing, like the Batman Superman film that just came out. I felt real passionate about that one. So I got about 3 paragraphs in and I realized, man, I wasted all of my passion on a special episode, and then the regular episode a couple of days later, I'm passioned out.
Oh, no. And that's okay. So that's interesting that you say that, because when I started contemplating the idea of putting together the podcast, I had a number of iterations on what I wanted it to be. And initially I thought I'd do something very creative, and being a fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000, my initial vision was to create this fake world where I was stuck in my mom's basement and robots, aliens, and zombies attacked. And I was stuck in my basement with all of my media, my comics, my TV, my movies, everything that I loved, and that the podcast was essentially my outward signal where I'd get a chance to talk to people and initially, and sometimes connect with other, last surviving fans that are out there and talk about it. And it was interesting, the limitations of it, where I'm like, okay, I'm always going to have to pretend like I'm in a weird post-apocalyptic world when I make my references. So I'll always have to say Batman versus Superman, which came out so many years ago before the aliens came.
Yeah.
I thought, it's going to take about 5 minutes before I break for that. So I won't do that. No. Yeah. But I knew from the beginning, one of the things I did want to take a stand on is the idea of a fan. And as you are a fan of a number of different things, I just thought to me, at least, it's interesting to think about fans not as the almost derogatory place where words like fanboy and fangirl have come from, and have been appropriated because the subcultures have now taken back those terms and added nerd and geek as more of on a positive spin. But the idea that all those things assume obsession, and it's not necessarily in an ugly way, but in a fascinating way. If the definition is being a fanatic, aficionado, you're enthusiastic about something, it's, in my mind, and I think you won't disagree with the idea of it, is that it's kind of beautiful in the sense that it's its own language. When you're a fan of something, whether it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, music, poetry, whatever it is, however esoteric it can be, it can also be pretty embracing, but you can meet another person who's a fan of the same thing, and that void is automatically filled with whatever it is that you are obsessed about, and not in a bad way, but in a loving way where you appreciate it.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the negativity comes from things like message boards and internet trolling and things like that, because at its root, you're correct. A fanatic is somebody that is obsessed with something or deeply invested or passionate about it. There's a specific language to all of those kinds of things. And I wear it like a badge. At some point, it was a bad thing, right? And I know that at some point in your life, it's been a bad thing too. but I embrace it now. It's a wonderful thing, and I try and surround myself with just the right balance of people on both sides. So there are those that can speak my language. There are those that say you're insane for speaking that language. And it's not wrong to say that it's like art. It's not wrong to say that it is like a love of poetry. It's that same dedication, that same love. It just happens to be more of a popular culture type thing. And that can be taken in the wrong direction. Many people do, but it is such a pure thought process that goes into loving something that much. I agree with you 100%.
And I think where that purity comes, it's a big target, because like you said, you can have someone who feels so passionate about something and someone else that can so easily want to tear it down. My conversation with Josh will continue momentarily. Just wanted to interrupt the action here and let everyone know that you'll be able to find new episodes and old episodes at www.fan2fan.com. And you'll also be able to find the podcast on Facebook. Just search under Fan2Fan, and on Twitter at Fan2Fan Podcast. And all of those are the number 2 between the two fans. I love questions and comments, so please send them my way. I will greatly appreciate them.
And now, on with the show.
Let me go back to the idea of the podcast. So you've been doing this for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned?
Oh, I've learned that I actually am okay at it, that it's not something that I should have stage fright about. I think that anybody that's just starting out with it, you can be passionate about something, but it's another thing to transfer that to a microphone and make it sound like it's something that you would want to listen to. Sitting in the corner at this table that I'm looking at right now, I had quite a bit of stage fright coming into it, and I over-researched the materials that we were talking about, and it doesn't flow like that. Podcasts are conversations. If you have somebody that is reading off of a script, I'm sure that that's just fine, because there are people that are professionals at that. But anybody that is just a fan, or somebody that isn't necessarily a professional, understand that it's a conversation that you're having either with an assumed audience or the people that you're recording with. And that's the thing that I've learned the most, is that it's much simpler than, oh my gosh, I have to be an expert at this. And it's also much simpler than, oh my gosh, this is going to be heard by a whole lot of people, because that isn't always the case, of course. I would also say that the dedication and time that you put into it really comes across on your show. If I watch just one movie a week, for example, then I wouldn't be prepared for what we're talking about. I could offer anecdotes maybe, but I wouldn't be prepared. So I try and watch as much as possible getting in there, because that's where the meat of the conversation is going to go. You'll hear that passion, whether it's a good or a bad film. You'll know that I put the time into it. Whatever it is that you're doing, learn and understand that it's going to have to be something you dedicate a lot of time to. And of course, it's a thankless enterprise in some ways, and that you don't necessarily do this all the time to get paid. You do it because you have a passion. So dedication is the other thing that I've learned. It's a new level of dedication to do something so much and then not receive necessarily any kind of payment for it or reimbursement for it.
So thinking about that idea, so have you seen comments regarding the podcast, I Hate Critics?
Yes, absolutely. We do get reviews on iTunes more than anything. In fact, our Facebook page that we have and our website have been pretty immune to all kinds of negativity thus far, but we have received the entire gamut in the terms of the range of reviews. We've gotten the 5 stars and then the 1 stars, and the 1 stars usually aren't that harsh, like these guys are complete idiots or whatever. Usually they'll focus on one thing, that we reviewed a young adult film poorly, which is a gigantic surprise there, or that one of us really hated something and the other two were different about it. We just got a 1-star review a couple weeks ago that called one of us a miserable hipster. Now, the funny part about that, Bernie, is that it could have been any one of us depending on the week. we all are, in our own turns, miserable hipsters that think that this was made specifically to please us alone. So that's funny. The negative comments are always hilarious, even if they're, a little off base and they're not true. I always try and take something from them, just like the positive comments. Either reinforces that what I think would be the right thing to do is right, or that maybe we could just harness it and focus it a little better. That would be good.
Any regrets so far in the 3 years that you've been doing it?
Oh, no, not at all. Well, I guess if there's any of them, it would be that I haven't taken advantage of everything that the show has had to offer. We've gotten some invites, for example, from some movie studios to go see films ahead of time, like critic screenings. We've received a number of screeners from directors or promoters for very small projects, and we haven't been able to do all of them. We have done some, and it's been probably the best moments for me on the show are when I've been able to talk to directors or producers or stars of a particular movie or documentary, and that's great. It's not a star thing. I don't want to talk to the stars per se, although that still is cool. To be able to talk to somebody about the film that they've made or that they were in is a behind the scenes opportunity that I've always relished. I've been that guy that says I want more bonus features on the Blu-ray. So of course that's the best part of it for me.
The idea of taking any creative venture on, and we'll throw in there the idea of podcasting, especially with consistency, because that's where in the notes you saw I noted the pod fade effect.
Yes.
And I am very much a planner, and I firmly believe if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So I wanted to do this podcast with complete planning done in advance, so that way I would know not only the logistics, the technical aspects, but then try to realize, okay, why is it that I want to do this? What do I want to talk about? Who do I want to talk about these things with? And, kind of creating some parameters, and then realizing that I wanted to take some of those parameters away. But the idea of the pod fade effect sits on my head, because then I think, okay, there are so many creative things that I've enjoyed and they dissipate, whether it's, a band or a director where you want to see more work from them, a TV show that's canceled way earlier than I would have enjoyed. And the pod fade effect, since it's been termed, at least by Urban Dictionary, the idea it's disappeared. You never hear any episodes again. It's been the shadow in my corner that's like, all right, plan and do it again. Make sure you do this right. Make sure you do it consistently. And that's something that through the I Hate Critics podcast, it's a testament to what you guys have been able to do for so long and so consistently. And like you said, it's not just going to see a movie. It's not just going to, your DVD Blu-ray shelf and popping in a movie like The Money Pit to revisit, just to, have it fresh in your mind. It's the idea that I'm recording, I'm going to talk about a movie from the 1980s, and I may have seen it a few years ago. So there's a part of me that feels like I need to prepare, and maybe it's, it might be too much to say that it might be like a director watching other films and putting together kind of like a visual storybook in his head on the references that he's going to look at, the touchstones, or a musician who's listening to their influences, the idea that I'm going to see this movie just so I know what the fuck I'm talking about. So
Exactly.
It's not, like you said, it's not anecdotes or the idea that, the movie was kind of like this, or it was, from what I remember, it's I saw the movie, it was self-imposed homework, and being an artist, one of the, so I draw, but one of the things that I heard early on, which kind of summed it up for me, is that being an artist is like having homework every day for the rest of your life that you assign to yourself. So the podcast idea is essentially that. It's a responsibility. It's an obligation that you've given to yourself. And luckily, like you said, you have some cohorts that, help you endure the journey every week when you guys record. But the idea is this is something that you've put on yourself as a piece of passion. It's something that you want to do for yourselves. If other people listen to it, great. If other people enjoy it, wow, terrific. If other people recommend it to other people, now you're getting into a very sacred territory.
Yeah, you're right about that. In fact, one of the things that's been a saving grace to me is that I realize I care about what other people think, but I can't if I'm talking about something. Why would I talk the way that I do on the podcast if I genuinely thought people are going to listen to this? I have to go in with the assumption that this is me relieving myself of all of that pent up passion and thought about the week in film. That has to be the way that I look at it. And so when you get my opinion, it's 100% honest. It might be silly. It might be too emotional. It might be, the absolute wrong angle to take. And that's totally fine. But you really have to put yourself out there. I guess you could call that a work of art. But Bernie, I got to be honest, it seems so much lazier to call that a work of art. And then I see your actual art and I say, oh, wait a minute, I can't call myself an artist. There's no art involved in me doing that. But you've put it into a different perspective for me in saying that you have to do the work. It's self-imposed homework. Each week, it does feel like homework. Like, oh man, I have to watch this night. I have to watch this. Once I'm finished with it, of course, no, it's not homework at all. It's the greatest thing in the world. But you are self-imposing that just to make sure that you get the quality results out there. There's no way I could BS my way through a show. I have to do it. It has to come out honestly. I wouldn't know any other way to do it.
You're trying to create a quality product. You're trying to be honest in your opinions to yourself, to the people that are listening to it, which I guess would go back to the idea that when you're listening to a podcast, if you create that sense of loyalty to the show, to the host, to whatever, then you have that sense of intimacy. When you suddenly start hearing ads at the top of the hour evolve to one after every segment, it becomes disruptive. And
Yes,
doing marketing as my day job, the clients that I always work with, I always tell them any marketing that we do is very different from advertising. Advertising is the thing, the ad that you see in the magazine, the billboard that you see on the expressway. It's just a thing. The marketing, that's the psychology behind it, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to get the person to feel, and ultimately how you want them to feel about your product or your service. But it can never be disruptive because you're always paying for the privilege to be a part of conversations. And in social media, when I do social media marketing, it's the idea that people are connecting with high school friends, college friends. They are listening to music that their niece recorded, many states away. So when they see an ad for something, it's disruptive to them. So podcast, in a sense, can be very, very intimate because you're having this conversation and you're broadcasting it and people are digesting it and they're taking it in and they're kind of following with that conversation. And because it doesn't have the constraints of radio, it can be, like you mentioned earlier, it can be organic. It can be conversational. You're just listening to two people talking like they were right in front of you. So it's interesting. It's like then the 5-star reviews, people, they want to share how they appreciate it, just like the 1-star reviews want to share that with you too.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that the organicness of it. That doesn't mean, of course, that podcasts in general, including ours, don't have a structure to them or a consistent structure, be it an intro, be it an outro, be it a middle point, whatever. the conversation is derivative of an actual structure to the show. If we just came in every week and sat down on the furniture and said, what did you see this week? It wouldn't be the same as, okay, here are the new releases this week. Here is something that's related to that in a classic that we're going to revisit. Here is a slew of films from 30 years ago. Here are some trailers. That's the way that we do it. And the conversation is derived from that. You still have to have some kind of structure that gets it in there. It is organic, but it's derivative of structure. I hope that makes sense.
Speaking of preparation, so full disclosure for anyone that's listening, and if you are, you're probably related to me or a friend, so thanks.
That's how it started.
Or I'm sorry in advance, but nonetheless, I'd sent you some notes yesterday on what this episode was going to be about. So it's interesting because I took the idea of preparation to heart, maybe too much, maybe too little, either way. But I needed to put some direction to the conversation, not so much to direct it, but to at least say there are certain, comments, certain, just certain things that are part of the conversation to bring up, but it should go where it's going to go. So the idea that you're talking about preparation, again, something else that you're doing, thankless, but something that you're doing because you want to create something of quality. We can, maybe the substance part is where you might have issue with, but you want to at least create something of quality.
That's right. To be honest, your notes are so very thorough. I looked back to my notes on the first show that I was on here, and this is no offense to you, Bernie, but they're cute in a way because they're so well organized and highlighted and bullet pointed. And I thought to myself, reading, I'm like, wow, this looks a lot like my Return of the Jedi notes from 2013, just, with bigger words and things that actually matter. So in that way, I'm looking at all this and I say to myself, yes, he's going to go in the right direction because he's starting off in the neurotic way and eventually it'll just get less neurotic.
Well, I will happily take the charge of being neurotic in preparation. I hope it doesn't come across in the conversation so that folks at least. I'll finish my conversation with Josh in just a few seconds here. In the meantime, if you enjoy the podcast, subscribe to Fan2Fan, whether you're using iTunes, Stitcher, or Overcast. Add the podcast for new episodes every 2 weeks. We have some great topics that are coming up on the horizon here. I think you'll enjoy them. Great guests, and it'll be really fun and entertaining. So thanks a lot. Now back to the conversation. And that's where the idea of having different subjects. I don't want it to be just about movies or TV or comics for that matter. These are things that I'm passionate about, but I like the idea of talking to people about what they're passionate about. And if we share the same thing, great. But if it's not, it's like, all right, well, make me a witness to what you love so much. Share with me why it is that you love whatever it is. And it might be something that I enjoy, but I'm looking at from a different perspective. So I have a friend of mine who's a teacher, and he's very much into comics. I enjoy comics. I make comics. But as a teacher, he brings in comics into the classroom. Perspective that to me is very, very fascinating because I want to see how he uses something that he loves, where every Wednesday he'll go out and buy new comics. How does that translate to the classroom? How does he use it to help educate his kids? So I'm like, okay, conversation to have in the future. You're a fan of Star Wars. You're a fan of the Aliens movies. So it's kind of like, okay, well, in the future, and I'll have you on record here so that way I can use it against you in the podcast court of law. Those are conversations I want to have with you as fans, because on the alien side of things, I am a fan, but probably peripheral to how much of a fan you are of that franchise.
I've spent far too much time to not be considered, if nothing else, a theoretical expert on the world of Alien and Aliens, et cetera, even though it does not matter one little bit. I just got transfixed by it, just like the teacher is transfixed by the comics to the point where it leaks over into his profession. That's fantastic, by the way. I've heard of teachers using that before. That's fantastic that he does that. But to the point where there are college courses that talk about comics or comic characters in general as well. So good for him.
Yeah, no, it's all, I don't know. The idea of fandom is interesting to me, and I hope that I can get enough interesting folks on here to talk about what they're passionate about. And 99% of the time, I'd like it to be entertaining. And if 1% of the time it could have a little bit of substance, then I feel like I've accomplished the mission somehow, whatever the mission is. I guess I should write a mission statement at one point, or maybe that's too cute.
No. I would say do write a mission statement, and then about 10 episodes in, rewrite your mission statement again.
There you go. I need my flashcard. The idea that actors have this flashcard that they fold up and keep to themselves, but that's their core, the nugget that they always go to when they think about their character and say, okay, what does my character want? I can always go back to this 3x5 card and say, this is his motivation. That is what they are working for, and they are willing to do anything to get to that point. And if I can always stick to that core, then I can wander off to different places, but that's my home.
Yes, you're constant. I have this book with me. It's one of those little notebooks that if you carry with you, you probably look like a 1950s journalist or a current hipster. I don't know how you would explain it, but I'm on my 6th one now, and that is my constant. That's what I go back to and realize, oh yes, the main idea of what I was going to say, I did write it down as I was watching it. It's not like I have poor recall or anything like that. It's just that helps remind me there is a main point to all of this, which is similar to what you're saying. I understand. It's my flashcard. See, once again, you're making me feel like an actor, which just gives me a good nerd boner. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. That's why we're doing audio and not video podcasting.
Yes, sir. And other reasons.
That's right. So you ready to have a little fun here?
Yes, sir. Hit me.
Okay. So I came up with this game just because everything I read about podcasts says I should have games on here. So that's the other part of this podcasting journey. I'm going to be incredibly transparent, not only on the technical side when I get to tell people how difficult it is to edit out ums and and likes from the production process, or the fact that I'm sucking on halls right now because I've recorded over a dozen episodes in about 2 weeks, all in the service of not falling into the pod fade effect.
Of course. We'll see that's why you sound so much like a sultry Barry White right now. Please go on.
Can't get enough of your podcasting, baby. So the game.
The show every time with that. You've just done it. Well done.
So the game, it's the idea of podcasting and the fact that there are countless podcasts out there by, as you mentioned early on, just about anyone. I thought, let's have a little fun here just because it took me forever to come up with the idea of Fan2Fan. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to go through titles of a number of different podcasts, and then you will have to tell me if you feel, based on the title, if it is a podcast or not.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir.
This is probably the part where I will use the power of technology to add some fun drum roll music of some sort. But if not, that's so much easier. Telling you people, if you want to do your own podcast, just use your fingers, make the little drum noise. You don't have to go find a public domain piece of drum roll music and add it on there. So that's my transparent moment.
And my rapid fire answers will prove that I'm not looking these up one by one.
Good. Okay, put smartphones down, Google off. First one, Casting Bait, a podcast show on the art of bait casting.
I'm going to say no.
You are correct, sir. It is not a podcast.
Sounds like a hell of a fishing show, though. Huh?
Second one, Pod Dictionary, an examination on the history and origins of one English word 5 days a week.
Yes.
2 for 2. That is a podcast. All right. Number 3, Shakespeare sonnets read by some guy from New York.
Oh, I like this one. Yes.
You want it to be, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And
please tell me it is.
I'm sure you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, and Overcast, or any of your podcast download technologies.
What's that called again? Shakespeare what?
Shakespeare sonnets read by some guy from New York.
Yes.
I feel like this is the snakes on a plane of podcasting. He's basically telling you right from the beginning, if you don't like Shakespeare and you don't like the New York accent, you're probably not subscribing to my podcast, and that's okay.
That's right.
I should have 5-star reviews at this point if I'm a guy from New York doing Shakespeare sonnets as my podcast, because everyone that tunes in should want and embrace this.
Absolutely.
All right, number 4, Pod People, a monthly discussion with tiny homeowners.
No, I'll go with no on that.
It is not. It is not. You are doing so much better than my wife on this one. I had to run it past her just to see if this didn't sound like a complete craziness. But okay, you're doing well. Ready for number 5?
Yes, sir.
Drunken Taoist, a podcast on whatever makes life intense.
Yes.
It is a podcast. All right, you are 5 for 5. Okay, here we go. All right, second half here. Dirtbag Diaries, an outdoor adventure podcast.
I'm going to go with yes.
6 for 6. All right, Josh, you're playing for that fictional merit badge that we talked about earlier. Okay. Number 7, the show about shows, a roundtable conversation about the trade show industry.
No.
Not a podcast. 7 for 7. Number 8, away.
Thank God, by the way.
As someone who does marketing and goes to way too many trade shows than I would like to admit to, I would have probably subscribed to that podcast, I have to say.
Well, there's your market right there.
There we go. Number 8, Away with Words, a podcast for grammarians and lexophiles.
Yes.
It is. Have you listened to any of these podcasts, by the way, that are real?
Say that again.
Have you actually listened to any of these podcasts? Because I feel like I either did I send you this part of the notes? Because I feel like I stopped and not.
No, the thing is, though, these descriptions, there's a certain way that podcasts describe themselves, and having seen enough of the blurbs about what certain podcasts describe themselves as, I think I can pinpoint which ones are and which ones aren't. Some that are a little too specific, some that are a little too general, and generally go with the specific ones because that's what podcasting is.
And that's why you're on the first episode of this podcast.
Yeah.
Number 9. Outside of our friendship since 1990, I was thinking about this earlier, 7, maybe 8?
1998, my first year there. So, yeah.
All right, you're on a roll here, so let's not take you away from this. Number 9,
okay.
Escape Pod, a science fiction podcast show.
No.
The Man Has Chinks in the Armor. That is indeed a podcast. It is. Wow. All right, so last one here, number 10. Podcastle, the audio fantasy magazine.
The audio fantasy magazine. I'm going to go with no.
That is actually a podcast.
Okay. Well,
so 8 out of 10. That is pretty good.
I'm curious about those last two too, because if it's a science fiction podcast, then I really should be on board. And in that last one, you couldn't necessarily tell what it would be based on the title. So fantastic. Are those all ones that you listen to?
No, I actually don't listen to any of those.
Oh, okay.
I do not.
Well, they have been plugged, though. Those that exist have been plugged.
Yes, for whatever that's worth, they have been plugged. Yes. Which was going to bring me to my next question. What podcast do you listen to?
Oh, a slew of them. First and foremost, I do listen to ours. I know that sounds a little silly, but I do because I think it's important to kind of have an idea of where we're going and where we've been, that kind of thing. And definitely how I sound, because if I start getting worse, then I have that extra tightening the next time that I speak. Also, there's a podcast locally that just happens to be run by a guy that our producer, Bob, our creator, Bob, knows very well. And that's a Chicago Cubs podcast called Ivy Envy. Many people know this one. They've got thousands of listeners, and the creators have been, to spring training, to the playoffs. They've been at, to Wrigley Field, to events and whatnot. And it's a fantastic show for those that love the Chicago Cubs, as I do. I also listen to some pretty nerdy ones as well. I have to plug Star Wars Action News. That is an episode that's a show specifically about Star Wars collecting. And I'm not the only one, obviously, but boy, every time I say it, this little part of me wants to cringe a little bit because I just know how it sounds.
And they don't limit it to action figures per se. I mean, I'm guessing it's probably anything collectible in the Star Wars world.
You are correct. They'll talk about, bread wrappers all the way up until your thousands of dollars type items. So it's a fantastic show, and also Illinois based. I do listen to Marin's podcast, the WTF podcast. I think that I enjoy Mark Maron as a comedian, so that draws me to that. And the fact that he's one of the godfathers of the podcasting industry makes me kind of want to see what he's bringing to the table.
I say after 600 plus episodes, I think he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I did listen to The Nerdist for a short period of time, but I found that I wasn't keeping up on it, so I stopped listening to that one. There is another science fiction podcast. It's called the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast. There's no catchy name like the other one that you mentioned, but it's out of Canada and run by a couple of guys that our own Bob met at a podcast convention in Las Vegas. And they do one movie each week, break it down, get everyone's involvement, and they're very user interactive-y. If that's a poor word choice, but they have a lot of user interaction, including myself. I've stuck my dumb opinion in a number of times, but they spend a whole episode talking about just one movie each week, and that works out really well. Mike and Mike,
sure.
Obviously, that's something I listen to. Bors and Bernstein show out of Chicago is probably my number one listen, because that's my wheelhouse right there. Sports and stupidity. So that's me in a nutshell. Those are the main ones that I listen to, and I really, really feel like I need to broaden my horizons. How about yourself?
I've got a few. NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, Nerdist. As an artist, I kind of gravitate to artist podcast, Ink Pulp Audio by artist Sean Crystal. There are quite a few different comic book artist podcasts, but I'll say I gravitate to him because the conversation tends to be more about the person and what led them to create, which to me is it's an interesting discussion to find out what motivates people, what gets them to give themselves that daily homework and do it for themselves, not always necessarily for a paycheck.
Yeah.
And there's a few, just like you mentioned, some esoteric ones. I'm a big fan of the Batman animated series. And,
yes.
There's Justin Michael has a podcast that's been running for a while now, probably about 20 plus episodes, called, ironically enough, the Batman Animated Podcast. And he's gotten a number of the creators, voice actors, storyboard artists on the podcast. And, for a show where I consumed it as a viewer, and now I'm kind of looking at it again with hindsight and some maturity, and I love the show that much more. It's kind of interesting to see, to hear these discussions with the people who made it and all the love that went into the creation of a cartoon. But again, that's what podcasts can be. They can pretty much be about anything, whether it's Mike and Mike and, powered by ESPN, or, anything about a very small esoteric subject.
Yeah, you know what? You've got them another listener, because I had no idea that existed, and I adore that show. So thank you.
So I Hate Critics once a week.
Yes, Our episodes are usually released on Mondays. We record them on a Saturday or a Sunday, and Bob usually has to meticulously work his way around it and get it out to everybody on Monday. We also have our website, and occasionally people write there. Our resident professional film critic, the guy that actually does know what he's talking about, and occasionally is his own miserable hipster, he will write as well, and he has tons of old archived reviews on there. Even my crappy old reviews are on there, and Bob finds a spot sometimes where he's passionate about something that he writes about. So it's good stuff from our perspective, but gotta listen first.
A troll, a critic, and a fan with perspective.
That's right.
IHateCritics.net.
IHateCritics.net and .com.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Twitter. Yeah. Twitter at H8Critics, and on Facebook at I Hate Critics.
iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual podcast apps.
Yep, and Google Play as well. So anywhere that you find podcasts, we should be at.
All right, and this is where you promise to come back on another episode here in the near future.
Bernie, I would bend over backwards to make sure I was on your show. And in fact, when you let me know that they're up, I'll be the first one downloading.
And that's the end of this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan2Fan podcast. Thanks for listening. Find us on fanpodcast.com, on Facebook, at Fan2Fan podcast on Twitter, and on your favorite podcast listening app. Till next time.
The beast, finding his victim gone, unleashes his fury.